Welcome to Good for a Chat. I'm Jo Taranto. This is a place where we introduce people making change in Australian communities, understand what makes them tick, and find out about the work that they're doing. Good for the Hood is a social enterprise consultancy who work with change makers at the forefront of this community change. I would like to acknowledge that today I'm on the land of the Wallumattagal, and I'm on the sort of middle between the Eora Nation to the east across Sydney Harbour and the Darug Nation to the west. And I'd like to pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, elders past and present. And I'm going to pause. And I'd like to recognise the importance of the oldest living cultures on our earth and acknowledge that if we wish to do more to improve our connection and return to regenerative practices in our communities, that the voices of Aboriginal people are central to what we all need to do. And that's why I'm really excited about today's yarn. With me today is a wonderful human being that I met last year through all the craziness of lockdowns. His name is Ciaron Dunn. And he's a proud Gumbaynggirr man who is currently back on country up in the beautiful Bellingen area of New South Wales. He's high and dry. He hasn't been flooded out, which is wonderful. Ciaron went to school in Canberra. He's got a degree in ecology. He's got a whole bunch of experiences which he uses to frame his work today. He has worked in urban horticulture design. He has worked across Aboriginal heritage management. He's worked in community development and engagement. He's worked with Forestry. He's worked with National Parks and Wildlife. He's a Landcare Coordinator for Local Land Services, and he's worked with the beautiful Cooks River down here in Sydney, which is where I met him most recently. I guess at the heart of it, Ciaron's passionate about social and economic justice and, improving the rights and inclusion and cultural safety for Aboriginal people. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. Beyond that, though, he loves photography. He tells me he loves eating, as we all do, loves music and gardening. And I'm really, really excited to introduce you to Ciaron Dunn. Hey, mate.
You're jogging away. Hello, everyone.
Hi,
thanks
Ciaron.
for having me, Jo.
No, thanks so much for joining us, mate.
Introduction.
Yeah. Oh, look, we got there in the end.
Yeah. No, I think the young fella's got a role there to play.
Look, he has a role to play. Whether he needs to play it at this moment is the question.
Yeah.
So tell us, Ciaron, you're back up in Bellingen, and we're just having a little chat. This is a very special place to you. What does it feel like to be out of Sydney, back up in on country and with your mob?
Yeah, look, I think relief is the big word for me personally, but also look a little bit of excitement, perhaps mixed with, I don't want to use that anxiousness word, but yeah, look, in some ways there's work we all need to do yesterday, and we need to do it now, and so there's some challenges up here that I need to address, and I'd like to address. I've got aspirations. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Yeah.
And so we first met. I think it was last year. It feels like the last couple of years have been a bit rolled into one, but which, was a project that I was doing a little bit of work on around the circular economy. And for anyone that was in the room, we were all sort of participating, but at some point in the workshop, all eyes kind of spun to Ciaron, and you became this kind of vessel of wisdom that everyone just wanted to put everything down and really find out what Ciaron was saying. So I guess, I've been aware of the not just the knowledge that you hold, but all your experiences up until this point. But I guess I'm wanting to know what your early life was like. Did you grow up in Bellingen, and what was it like growing up there?
No, Jo, I went to school in Canberra. So look, I went to 6 schools in 6 years. I lived in a few different places growing up. So, maybe that sort of has tempered my experiences towards, the way we look at the world. Bellingen was our place where we came back to for our summer holidays any sort of holiday. My father worked in Aboriginal affairs, and so that was kind of my break into, say, community politics. So living in Canberra, there's a mixed Aboriginal community from all over Australia, working in the public service. So I was sort of introduced to these people from around Australia as I was growing up, and hearing sort of tableside talks with Dad over community politics. So that was kind of this lead into this mythical place called Bellingen, where, you know, like, yeah, I grew up with the yarns and the stories about Dad and his uncles and his grandparents, and yeah, this was the place this was our Mecca, I suppose. This is where we came to find solace. Yeah. And look, after spending 10 years in the big smoke, I just needed to recharge. I suppose that's what I'm doing. My work in life has been a bit sort of itinerant, perhaps, maybe like growing up, but the opportunities have led me to live up and down the North Coast, not just in Sydney. So I feel really fortunate for that, because it's enabled me to complete a picture, I suppose, of the community here on the North Coast, and some of its needs, some of the challenges that need to be overcome. And these are at a personal level and also at a community level. You mentioned that thing where we met. You know, I was really, you know, privileged to feel part of that. But just opening my eyes to what I frame as the thing, you know, like when we look at culture, and it's the same but different aspects of culture. And so I suppose that's where all my experience have led me to this place where I can have opinions on the fact that, you know, as human beings, we all have needs and wants, and we should be trying to cater for these needs and wants. So look, that's a little bit of an overview.
Ciaron, sorry, mate. As a young man, what was it like growing up being Aboriginal? Did you feel like you were surrounded by other young Aboriginal men, or were you sometimes...
No, not at all. I was quite isolated in Canberra. So, and also, I suppose from a generational perspective, my little brother, who is 8 years younger, so by the time he started high school, that we had started getting refugees from Vietnam and whatnot. I didn't have that growing up. Our kind of cultural diversity came from the Greeks, Croatians, Italian, Serbian communities. So, yeah, fairly sort of isolated, I suppose. And kind of weird, you know, like you'd have all these white fella friends and you'd ask them about their cousins and they wouldn't have any, or they wouldn't have relation. And, you know, that was bizarre. So, you know, also, I suppose from a generational thing, you know, look, I'm not saying it was right, but yeah, I grew up with like Aboriginal jokes and whatnot sort of thing. So, you know, I was too naive to understand that, but I can look back and say, look, that was rather distasteful. But anyway, we move on. Yeah. So.
And so what led you to study ecology? Was that something that you just knew felt right, or was it, you know, is it something you sort of fell into?
Well, my first work was with ATSIC. Sort of, I suppose I was chasing the community politics, but I just realised early on I wanted to work outdoors. So I took on horticulture, actually, you know, sort of make some money. But moving into ecology came from appreciating that that's my culture and heritage. Well, that's Aboriginal culture and heritage, biodiversity and conservation. So I suppose that was me sort of aligning that sort of same but different sort of approach to it all, recognising that there is two ways of looking at the world, realising and appreciating that in Australia, we have a population which is multicultural, but within that mix, there's Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, which are two inclusive terms but look, us mob, we have connections to pre-1978 populations, and that's something that small minor point is a big thing that differentiates us apart from our worldviews.
So with the work you've done, I mean, what are some of the things that you've obviously wanted to work outside? Is it something that you've just found yourself sometimes on projects going, I can't believe this is a job? Like, do you ever have that moment? And can you tell us about some of the work you've done over the years?
Yeah, I can tell you with great delight the work I did with Forestry. I counted trees for a living. Yeah. So look, 1, 2. No, look, they call it inventory and mensuration. It's a big part of forest management. You know, you need to get a sample sort of population of what's going on, but it's very solitary work. It's delightful to, during winter you can start a fire and make yourself bacon and eggs for morning smoko. So there's those little things. But yeah, just the solitude. But I suppose seeing things that you might, if you're in the city, you see them in the zoo. You know, you do see dingoes, you do see wedge-tailed eagles taking off, and you do have moments where you see snakes when you're walking in the bush. You're getting ticks, you're getting leeches. It's there's all types of things that are going on in terms of experiencing the bush. There's also the firefighting aspect of it. I've sort of been involved with a few incidents there while I was at Forestry. So, it's a whole gamut and a whole range of activities. But it's a bit of a boys' own adventure, I suppose, for the young fellas. But yeah, look, I just find a peace of mind when I'm with plants. Plants aren't difficult like humans. So.
I like that. It's true.
Yeah,
Do you think that connection is, as an Aboriginal man, do you think it's stronger, that need, or do you think that everyone has that deep need to connect with the natural environment and we just actually don't know it?
Yeah, look, I suppose in trying to give some understanding to that, I've grown up with my own personal bias on me and my people, and I honestly believe that us mob have an innate sort of thing. It's a human thing, but from a cultural perspective, it's just that us mob, we've only been exposed to the ways of the world for 234 years, whereas if you're a non-Aboriginal person, even if you've been here for 6 or 7 generations, you can draw your heritage and ancestry beyond that to another continent and another way of doing things. So I might mention the Greek and Italian people I grew up with. I mean, their ancestry is Roman Empire in some respects, if you want to trace it back that far. But not so much the genetics, but it's the way of viewing the dominant paradigm. That's the challenge that humanity faces, in my opinion, coming from. So yeah, non-Aboriginal people can have that connection that Aboriginal people might talk about. No worries, it's a human thing. So there's some deeper layers to this, Jo, I suppose.
And I was going to say, one thing that I've learned, from a number of people, but certainly heard it from you in a very articulate way, is when you talk about country, and, we hear this word, as white people, we hear this word, it's country, and so for us, I think quite often we think, well, country is the land and, it's the river, and they're quite finite things. But can you give me a little bit, of your perspective on what country means to you as an Aboriginal man.
Yeah, no worries. Look, I'd just like to start though in sort of qualifying. When I discuss black versus white, I'm not referring to a skin colour. I am referring to a worldview. So we might call it Eurocentralism.
Yep.
So apologies. It's just a habit of mine with speaking with mob that yeah.
No, 100%,
we know
mate. That's very, very please do. I think we appreciate your sincerity. No, please.
Yeah, no worries. But maybe you just remind me, what was that question? Sorry.
Yeah, so tell us about what country means to you, or maybe even more broadly to your mob. Like what does country mean when we talk about it through an Aboriginal lens? And I know it's not easy just to quantify in words.
Well, I suppose look, let's look at time and in a European way, we might look at it as a linear thing, going from point A to point B. I suppose with my old people's worldview, we're looking at space over time. We're looking at time not in a temporal sense. We're looking at it in a spatial sort of sense. So when we come to country, we talk about place, and it's a place that you have a belonging to. And that belonging comes from actually through the language, because the landscape itself will talk to us. And when you tap into that language, you're tapping into that belonging of that place. So I suppose that's the thing with country and connection. If you've grown up if you know about the Northern Rivers, you might have heard of hippies and that. They talk about Mother Earth, and you might have heard of the Ngaya synthesis as well. But I suppose in our ways, and this is matching the Western with the non-Western view, so underneath us we have bedrock and soil. And so, that's our grandmother and our mother and our daughter. And then we see above the landscape in the vegetation, we see that mirrored with that daughter, mother, grandmother relationship. And so I guess the other side of country is recognising that place, that space, and what is happening there, if that makes sense. And by what's happening, we're talking about events. We're not talking about it's 8 o'clock, we need to go to school. We're talking about I've woken up, all right, I need to have breakfast. And that might be the start of your event. But in a larger scale, we're talking seasonality, or we're talking about, so if you're in Sydney at the moment, the mullet are running. So that's kind of an event, that's a moment. And so that's raising awareness of country. And so, yeah, does that make sense?
No, I think it's, I've given you quite the ask to try and summarise it in words, something that is, from what my understanding, it's an essence as much as it's something you can describe. But
yeah, it's so both literal and a metaphor.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah, at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you, talk about, you've mentioned it briefly, but I've heard, I actually saw an amazing gig a couple of weeks ago, which it was great to go to live music again, mate. But I went and saw Briggs and Barker, two amazing Aboriginal hip hop artists, just completely badass, just really awesome. And I felt like the most white person in the room, and it was kind of awesome in that way too. And they were just saying,
own it.
I owned it, and I'm not the most cool person in the world anyway, Ciaron, but I definitely felt like a massive dork, but so welcomed. And they were just saying how great it was, obviously, to be surrounded by so many of their own mob, and just feeling like for once they weren't the minority, that actually, you know, but in a really inclusive and quite, you know, fun way. But I guess what I heard them describe, both of them actually, they talk about themselves as being from a place first, and that they talk about themselves as being an ancestor first, you know, they're standing on the shoulders of their ancestors, and then they talk about themselves last. And I guess I'm interested to know, it's so completely different to how, you know, white people, that Anglo-centric notion of I am Jo and I live in Sydney and I'm a mum of, you know, we do that in the complete reverse order. How does that, I guess, shape what, you know, first of all, am I right? And second of all, how does that must just be this completely different way of seeing the world. And that must be then before you even start, a very challenging cultural fit.
Yeah. So I mentioned walking two ways prior. And look, Aboriginal people are human beings. We've always had diversity, okay? But we've also had a sense of inclusivity but, you know, if we're talking traditional ways, but then come to the contemporary sort of ways, yeah, that's the challenge that a lot of us mob have with existing. I could tell you a few anecdotes about people I've met along the way, and so I have come across people in communities who are reluctant to take on an opportunity, and their justification is, oh no, that'll make me too white. Now, from a sense of logic, that can sound, but there's an intangible in there that you have to appreciate, like, you know, where we're kind of coming from. So, I mean, look, if you're doing, say, some comparative religious kind of componentry, you know, we're talking about, you know, the way Buddhist monks might be in terms of the way, you know, they're not treading on the ant or anything. I mean, that's the kind of care and concern that would have existed in, or does exist in my sort of community towards, you know, our worldview. Our traditions weren't about taking; they were about giving, and they. You know, I can remember my uncle and my dad talking to me about humility when I was 7 and 8. You know, it was like the first lessons they would sort of teach me, you know. So, yeah, there's a humbleness, I suppose, with our traditions, which tries to... I could argue I've done a 40-year anthropological study on non-Aboriginal people, and... but look, I speak to some friends of mine who are in business, for argument's sake, and they do business with people overseas, and the amount of hubris that comes from the mainstream dominant paradigm is, you know, I don't see why it should be at odds with any sort of normal person, let alone an Aboriginal person. But yeah, that's a big deal, or it's, you know, it's a big road to cross for a lot of mob, you know.
And I think it's interesting that you say, you know, this thing about humility, because I often hear from, you know, people who are trying to understand about how they can be more culturally inclusive, how they can be a better ally, a level of humility that we have to actually acknowledge that we haven't always done this well, that we're not doing it well enough, and that we actually have to do better. And that does take a fair amount of, I got it wrong, kind of, you know. And I think, so I'm really, I guess, interested that you've talked about humility, you know, from your side, because I definitely think we all need to be more humble and more open. And I guess I'm going to ask you, in your perspective, and I don't expect you to have all the answers, mate. I don't believe that it's your job to have to fix, you know, the problems that we've created. But
I'm gonna, yeah.
But if you could, that would be great.
Yeah, no worries, yeah.
Ciaron, I am interested as a citizen, you know, for people who are from that, you know, as you said, dominant paradigm, what can we do better? when it comes to being more culturally aware or more culturally inclusive, just in our average day-to-day life? I am going to ask about a few other groups about, business communities and also politicians in a second. But as an average citizen, who's not necessarily, maybe can't change the rules of it, other than they can vote and they can participate in civil society, what can we do better?
Yeah, that's a can of worms, ain't it? Yeah.
Open it, mate.
Look, I'm a fan of social justice. I like the idea of egalitarianism. So that's kind of, I suppose, my backgrounds as to some of the opinions I've developed on this. I've tried to be objective as possible in developing a viewpoint. It's just kind of too easy, I suppose, to point fingers, but it might be too complicated to turn it into too much of an academic exercise as to, what can I do as the individual, So look, we're all trying to do things a little bit better, I suppose, in our own little ways. I kind of take the thing that, from the decolonialist perspective, we're talking about, look, what is it about what Aboriginal people might be about? And, from our perspective, racism is an issue. Okay, so for the non-Aboriginal person, it's, well, are you a racist? Well, no, you're not. Okay, but what are you doing to be anti-racist? And we can draw these analogies, say, with gender equity. I could argue that I'm not sexist, Jo, but, objectively I might be. But what can I do to be anti-sexist? So I think there's a range of, look, what can I do to be anti-homophobic? How do we, people with neurological differences or physical disabilities, how are we approaching, because in some cases there'll be people who, tick a couple of those boxes, Aboriginal, female and neurologically different, for argument's sake. And so look, how do we do things better? Look, I think Jesus spoke about it, 2,000 years ago, but I think, love could be part of it. But, just working on our, perhaps not our tolerances, but, the way we accept differences or acknowledge differences,
And as a, if, say, you're running a business, right, what difference would, choosing to support businesses with, we hear groups where you can, support and get your procure from rules that she can't.
She's back.
Yeah.
You're muted.
There we are. Sorry, guys. I don't know what happened. I'm going to blame my son again because it seems like a convenient thing to do.
Air in the lines, eh?
I'm sorry. I may have frozen slightly before my question, and if I did, I apologise. I was just going to say, what can business owners do? Is it enough to, look at where we procure products to support Indigenous-led businesses, to buy, to make sure that we're, what can a business owner do if they're wanting to be more culturally inclusive and supportive?
Look, I suppose there's a range of things that businesses, and in a way, the way they're doing it is with what they call a RAP, or a reconciliation action plan, or they might have an Aboriginal retention and recruitment and retention strategy, or something of that ilk. I suppose it's that overall thing of, how a business can sell itself as part of its package, and look, cultural awareness is a part of that facet, and Aboriginal people might be a small part of the overall market, but there's I think coming back to that social justice sort of thing, I think we can be cynical about say greenwashing or the pink washing or whatever happens, but they're kind of steps in the right direction. The issue for me is, as an Aboriginal person, I might be quite anti-capitalist, so.
And that's okay. And lastly, we've got a federal election coming up. What would you like to be discussed or not discussed when it comes to, the national conversation around Aboriginal people? Do you think that they're, we hear a bit and then we don't hear anything, and then we feel, and I certainly feel like we haven't heard anything for a while. I mean, without, again, that can of worms, which I know is probably pretty large when it comes to that. But what are your thoughts? What would you like to see happen in the next little while?
Well, Jo, this is where I might get into a bit of controversy. I've been aligned a little bit with community politics and for some time, but also I take the idea of engaging with Aboriginal people seriously. I like to recognise that there are people in my community who are quite politically active, or they've just got viewpoints that might be a little bit different to the mainstream. That's okay. Look, you might have heard of the embassy down there in Canberra. Out of that sort of evolved a thing called the NCA, and they put a treaty on the table back in the 80s. So the Treasurer at the time was John Howard. The Aboriginal Affairs Minister was Fred Chaney. There's a bit of political history, and I suppose with the LNP, John Howard abolished ATSIC, ATSIC was the result of that treaty discussion. But Fred Chaney has been involved in the Recognised Reconciliation sort of organisation since 1984. So in talking federal politics and LNP, I'm not very happy with the way they have directed, socially engineered sort of politics over the last 20 years. It certainly hasn't helped my community. In raising the discussion of land rights, though, I can move it into the ecological sphere that beyond the politics of Aboriginal land rights, becomes that idea that our land, air and water deserve rights. Our flora and fauna deserve rights. So it's not just the people that belong to that landscape. It's there's a whole gamut, it's a whole range of things that need to be addressed. And I think we can all recognise, look, without a natural environment working, we're not going to have a quality of life for ourselves, let alone our grandkids. So, what would I like to see discussed? Land rights. Perhaps not just in the traditional sort of political sphere, but certainly towards, environmental concerns.
And I think
sorry, Jo, when politicians talk about sustainability, they're not talking about them. They're about sustaining a way of life that benefits them. Yeah. So, there's a lot of politics in conservation that could be done a whole lot better.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's certainly going to be an interesting time for communities in the next little bit.
Yeah.
And Ciaron, before we, if anyone's got any questions, obviously please put them in the chat now. But I've got two more questions. The first all is, what is better now than when you were growing up? What do you think has headed in a more positive direction from when you were a young boy?
The sincerity of non-Aboriginal people towards having, sort of reconciliation or, recognising Aboriginal people as part of community. Yeah, that's something that's changed, and there's still some challenges there, and I see them as generational things. But, look, I had a moment just last year where I had a couple of, they were student teachers, yeah, that's right, 21, 22-year-old student from non-English speaking family background sort of thing, and they wanted to know about Welcome to Country, and their point was, well, look, it's the kids that want it, so that's why we want a better understanding of it. So, that's heartwarming.
Good.
Yeah.
That's nice. And it is. It's lovely, even just from my own experience growing up, and I grew up in a community with, 30%, 40% Indigenous students in my school, and we never had anything. And I think I look back at it and think, just, and I know there's so many things to get right. But there's definitely.
Were there any Blairs there?
Anywhere?
Blairs at your school?
No.
Okay.
We know someone. Is this a cousin?
Yeah, I'm related to all this, but yeah.
Oh, there you go. I'll go through my. Yeah. There are a few Dunns actually. Yeah. So maybe a few people. I don't ask them about me. No. I swear I was an all right kid. I guess I wanted to know if people want to learn more from today, they're like kind of thinking, I need to do so much more than what I'm doing, or I want my family to learn more. Where should they go? What's the best way for them to find, accurate, appropriate information that's relevant to their local Aboriginal community? Yeah,
look, that's a relative thing, I suppose. I probably wouldn't know where to start. There's
the local land council is a good place to start. Is it actually you just have to keep digging and keep, is there no one right way? Because I guess that's also an answer, right?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't suggest there's one right or wrong way. I suppose it's relative to the individual and their place. What place are you in? I mean, and who are the local people? Have I got any relationships with any of the local people? How might that happen? It might not, for a lot of people, it's not relevant to have, there might not be a lot of Aboriginal people in your neighbourhood.
No.
So, I guess it just starts with that idea of, understanding who was there or what country it is, and then, sort of go from there. What sort of communities, structures, That's kind of where I'd go to, and then if you're lucky, pick a family and stick with them.
Just adopt someone, you reckon, or let them adopt you, more importantly.
Well, look, we can talk about the colonisation process and look, kind of the histories and what went on there. But look, what didn't happen was intermarriage.
Mm.
And if we're talking cultural aspects, I mean, to the traditional people, if that had happened, that's where that relationship, that reciprocity starts sort of happening. So, don't race out there and marry an Aboriginal person. But look, community engagement doesn't start with being at the altar. It starts with finding out someone, whether they're appropriate to talk to or not. What's your name? Do you want to have a coffee? That sort of stuff. Yeah.
I love it. It's a great way to finish up. Not just because I love coffee, mate, but
no worries. I think I do. Yeah.
But look, Ciaron, I'm just so grateful for your time. I know you're a busy guy. You've got a lot going on up there, and I know that you know, it's been a big few months for you. So I wanted to thank you on behalf
no worries, Jo.
of myself, but also anyone who's been watching this back. It's a really great opportunity to, you know, to see your story. I know that you don't speak for everyone, nor should you, but hey, we need to hear voices like yours more and more. And look, we really, I'm very grateful for your time. And I feel like you need to write a book or start a podcast, or just a little bit of Ciaron wisdom every day would be great if we could.
I don't know about that, Jo. I don't know. But look, thank you and bless you. Look, maybe we'll make a little bit of a difference. No, maybe someone will hear what I've got to say and think, yeah, maybe he's onto something.